All right, so this is going to be a really brief lesson on 2 genetic disorders that are really good examples to talk about because they compare and contrast different types of inheritance. Okay. Comparing Downs syndrome to sickle cell anemia. So if I were to do a T-chart, way to draw a straight line on this head. If I put Down syndrome over here, and sickle cell anemia over here. Let's brainstorm for a minute. What kinds of things can you tell me about either one of these? Take a shot at it. What would you put on the left for Down syndrome and on the right for sickle cell anemia? How do you get Down syndrome? What's it caused by? Yes, it's an extra chromosome. Very good, yes. And it is something that's inborn, right? And it has to do with the chromosomes, and therefore we say it's genetic. But very, very different from sickle cell anemia. You're going to see why. So this is because of the condition of trisomy 21, which means you have an extra chromosome number 21 in every one of your trillion cells in your body. There's one too many chromosomes. And that, believe it or not, just that extra little bit of DNA causes quite a few symptoms, quite a few special conditions that you might know that Down syndrome people have. In every cell, every body cell. Luckily, chromosome number 21 is a very small chromosome. It's a very small pair. You'll never hear of a disorder that has an extra chromosome number 2. If you look at the human karyotype, you'll notice chromosome number 2 is pretty big. If you had an extra chromosome number 2, probably that embryo would never develop and would die before it even became anything human. The trisomy disorders, and there's only a very few of them, that result from having too many of one particular type of chromosome, they're all the smaller chromosomes that are either one too many or one too few. So Down syndrome is one of those. And if you think about this carefully, can Down syndrome travel down a family tree? What do you think? Can you put Down syndrome on a pedigree and trace it through a family? How did that extra there? Very good. Yes, the answer is no. Okay. So the way that extra chromosome gets there, the real cause, right, is a spontaneous error. Spontaneous error in meiosis. In one of your parents' meiosis went wrong, and the chromosomes stuck together when they should have separated. That's what causes any trisomy or any monosomy. That's also a thing too. You can get a karyotype with one too few chromosomes, right? Error in meiosis in one of the parents, and that's actually called non-disjunction. Is the name of that. Non-disjunction is when meiosis is going along and the chromosomes are separating, and during one of the anaphases, instead of doing this, the chromosomes do that. And you get too many chromosomes in a sperm or an egg and too few in the other one. And that, if that sperm or egg then goes on to fertilize, results in somebody having too few or too many chromosomes in the original zygote. And that is not something that's going to go down through family trees. That's a spontaneous mistake that happened in one of the parents' gonads, germ cells, as they were going through meiosis. The most common reason for it, and the most common people that wind up having Down syndrome children are people who have waited a little longer to have their babies. Women in particular, women who wait until they're 40 and older, which is happening more and more because people are waiting and having their careers first, and there's no judgments here. But it is factual that we found that Down syndrome babies are most often born to women who are a little older. There's just a better chance. And the reason is because as a woman, we are born with all the eggs already there that we're going to ever have. And then we release them one by one when puberty starts, right? So the last meiotic division that happens when the sperm fertilizes that egg is happening to an egg that's already 40 years old. And it's been sitting there waiting all that time for that final fertilization to go through the last chromosomal separation. So your eggs are as old as you are as a woman. With you guys, it's totally different. You start making sperm like easy bake ovens when you're, 14, 15, and you make them by the millions, fresh, until you're 70. So your sperm are probably not going to have defects in terms of non-disjunction, because you go all the way through meiosis and pop out those sperm, and most of them are in pretty good shape, right? And if they're not going to reach the egg anyway. So there you go. That is something that is connected. It's connected to the age of the mother, usually, to the mother's age, right? And it does not, can't be traced through a pedigree, through a family trait, because since it's something that's spontaneous, you didn't inherit it from mom and dad, you got it because something spontaneous went wrong in them, right? So it can't be traced through a pedigree. And remember, it's the result of an entire extra chromosome. We're not talking about an allele, a mutated allele that's inherited or is in a homozygous or heterozygous condition in the chromosome. We're talking about an entire extra chromosome that you got. Now let's go back and take a look at sickle cell anemia. So sickle cell anemia, yes? That's a good question, Mikhail. The 21st chromosome, what is actually in there? I have to think that there are genes in the 21st chromosome that are responsible for, some of them may be responsible for features of the face that develop during the embryonic and fetal period when you're still in the womb. The size and length of the fingers, the features of the face, the final development of parts of the brain could be in there. So, and that's a really good question. I would have to research that. I'm not really sure. I mean, every chromosome carries quite a few genes on it, even one as tiny as that. But if you look at a Down syndrome person, you're thinking, what kind of features are on that chromosome? Probably whatever features on the person are not quite right, or not quite as normal as they could be, right? Okay, so sickle cell anemia. What can you tell me about that one? Those of you who've done the practice. Is sickle cell anemia an entire chromosome problem, or is it a particular allele that you inherit? Yes, it's an allele. Yes, okay. Actually, and this is something that we didn't get time to go over, but it's actually a codominant allele, if you remember that from freshman year. It's a autosomal, so it's not sex-linked, codominant allele that is inherited, right? And it can be traced. Can be traced. on a pedigree. So it's a particular mutant form of an allele that it codes for the protein hemoglobin. That's what it really is. Mutant allele for the gene that codes for hemoglobin. All right, let's go back to the beginning of the year. What's hemoglobin? Remember? Do you remember what? Yes, I'll answer your question in a minute, Elsa.
It's blood clotting chemical.
That is really a very common error for you to think that, because you're thinking of hemophilia, right? Hemophilia is caused by a mutant allele for the protein that clots blood. So you're thinking of hemophilia, which a lot of people mix up with sickle cell anemia. So yes, hemoglobin is a chemical in the red blood cells that carries oxygen. Yes, that's correct. Yes. Don't feel bad if you got that mixed up. A lot of people get that mixed up. So hemoglobin and the sickle cell anemia mutant allele, there's a mutant allele that makes hemoglobin the wrong way, so it's the wrong structure. Now think of your red blood cells as little sacs that are running around your body, and the only thing that's inside them are millions of hemoglobin molecules. That's the only thing you've got in a red blood cell. And its job is to carry oxygen to all your cells. So you have a sac full of oxygen traveling around and giving oxygen to your cells. Well, if the hemoglobin is the wrong shape, that causes red blood cells to form these hooks, right? These sort of crescent-shaped, moon-shaped hooked cells. Their normal shape is a nice round, soft donut thing that kind of fits through all your capillaries and slides through everything really nicely. If you have hook-shaped red blood cells, though, that's what sickle cell anemia is. It can be a very painful disease. Think about all those tiny, millions of tiny little hooks trying to get through your tiny little capillaries and your joints and your eyes and your heart. It can be very painful. There's a lot of medications now that help deal with sickle cell anemia. It's not nearly the deadly disease that it used to be, but it is something that needs to be managed. So the mutant allele codes for hemoglobin. So if you've done the practice, you know that the big A is the codominant allele for normal hemoglobin, right? Normal hemoglobin. And codominant means they're equally strong. That's what codominant means, okay? And then the mutant allele is an equally strong allele that codes for abnormally shaped hemoglobin that then goes through and causes the red blood cells that they're floating inside to turn into the wrong shape, right? That's the connection between the molecule and the cell level. Okay, so abnormal hemoglobin, which causes those sickle cell shaped red blood cells, right? Causes red blood cells to sickle and then gives you lots of symptoms, right? Lots of circulatory symptom trouble. Circulatory problems, pains in the joints, problems with the eyes, all kinds of things, which is what sickle cell is. So those are the two alleles for that, and you can trace this through a pedigree. So for example, here, let me go through this, because this will also help you with the practice if you haven't done it already. If you have a man and a woman, right, and they have, let's just do the full example here and kind of with all the connections. Say they have 3 children, right? Say this one is affected, this one is not. There it is. That boy too. Okay. This is not sex-linked, by the way. Sickle cell anemia is not sex-linked. Hemophilia is, right? We've talked, that's a different, totally different disease that also has to do with blood, but with a different facet of blood, right? So let's say that we have A and S to play with here. This person is affected with sickle cell anemia, so what is this person's genotype? Using A's and S's. Single trait, right? So what 2 letters would this sickle cell anemia affected daughter have?
S.
Yes, 2 S's, very good. Yes. She'd be homozygous for the mutant allele, and therefore she's got the disease. Okay. Now, what if this person has absolutely no abnormal hemoglobin, no sickle cell shaped at all? What would his be? 2 big A's, right? Yes, he's homozygous for the normal allele. He's just fine, no sickle cell anemia. Now, what about this person? This person doesn't have sickle cell anemia, but happens to be immune to malaria. Yes, there's the heterozygous advantage. Immune to malaria, right? We'll go into that in just a second. All right, go back up here to the parents. Let's solve the puzzle. What 2 letters do both of the parents have to have if they have these children? Yes, they're both heterozygous. Yes, they both have to be. They both have to be heterozygous. Very good, yes. Otherwise, they couldn't have this child, and they couldn't have this child, or this child, if they didn't both have both codominant alleles. Sorry. That's good. Okay, so here's the thing. You have more incidence of sickle cell anemia, people afflicted with sickle cell anemia, in certain human populations than in others. The ancestry of the human populations that have more sickle cell anemia tend to be from Africa, particularly in places where there's a particular Anopheles mosquito species that carries malaria and where there are a lot of malaria infections. Does that make sense with what you see here? Why would there be more sickle cell anemia in people of African descent, especially in the lowlands where there's lots of water and mosquitoes? Because there's almost no sickle cell anemia in people who are from, like, Greenland or England or places in the north, right, where there's no cold, where there's no mosquitoes. Yes, okay. So it's basically it. And we haven't, sorry about that. We haven't talked about, hold on. Okay. It's okay, they've got one.
Can I plug in my laptop?
Okay. Oh, sure, yes. Do you have a charger?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Okay, so malaria, again, of the 2 diseases that we talked about on the screen, Down syndrome is a genetic disease that you get if meiosis goes wrong in a parent, right? And it's an entire extra chromosome. Sickle cell anemia is a result of a mutant allele occurring twice, and it can be traced through a pedigree, and it's a single gene on a chromosome, and that's how you get sickle cell anemia. What's malaria exactly? What do you know about malaria? What causes you to get malaria? Yes, it's a parasite. Very good. Okay, so malaria isn't genetic at all. It doesn't travel through families. It is just if you are in the wrong place at the wrong time and the wrong mosquito bites you that has the parasite, which is a single-celled parasite that travels into your bloodstream. And what the parasite does is it specifically attacks your red blood cells. It actually goes inside them and eats them from the inside out. Kind of gross. But you can get some really deadly symptoms from malaria. They're very, very high fevers. And if all of your red blood cells are being eaten, suddenly you don't have enough oxygen getting to your cells because they are impeding the ability of your red blood cells to give you oxygen. So malaria can kill. It's a killer. And how can you, prevent getting it if you live in a place where there's mosquitoes? There's not a whole lot you can do. So if you're already born with this condition, where you have some of your cells that have hemoglobin in them that might cause them to start sickling, I believe what happens is your immune system is already primed to deal with anything going on in your blood cells. So they are already getting rid of any cells that are starting to sickle. And since only half of them are, then you don't get sickle cell anemia as the symptoms. You don't get that. But if a parasite comes along and tries to get into your red blood cells, if you already have an immune system primed to watch the shape of your red blood cells, then it's kind of like already being vaccinated against malaria, because parasites who try to attack somebody who has got this heterozygote advantage, right? That's what it's called, and it's inborn, right? Heterozygote advantage. That person is protected against this very deadly disease. The cost to the population is that you wind up keeping these mutant S alleles in the population, because in order to have heterozygotes like this, who are protected against this deadly thing, you also are sometimes going to have these people who are born with a double dose of that mutant allele. So there's a payment, but that's why we still have sickle cell anemia in some populations. It's the cost of also having some of the people who are protected in those populations. Okay, so that is all I wanted to tell you about that. And hopefully you found that interesting and maybe helped you understand genetics a little bit better.